The commercial flight from Chicago to Los Angeles was nearly full when Marcus Reed entered business class carrying his sobbing 5-year-old son. A woman in a crisp charcoal suit glanced up from her tablet, her voice cutting through the cabin just loud enough to be heard. How does someone like that even afford business class? The child's cries intensified as passengers settled into their seats. Then, 20 minutes into the flight, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with controlled panic. "This is an emergency. We need a military pilot on board immediately. Anyone with fighter jet experience, please identify yourself to the crew now." Marcus Reed had never imagined his life would look like this. At 39, he moved with the quiet dignity of someone who'd commanded respect in places most people would never see. His faded denim jacket, bought at a thrift store 2 years ago, hung loose on his still athletic frame. The scuffed boots on his feet had been resoled 3 times, a detail that spoke volumes about a single father's careful budgeting. In his arms, Noah Reed was pure childhood distress. His dark curly hair stuck to his tear-streaked face, his small hands gripping his father's collar like a lifeline. He had his mother's deep brown eyes, the same dimpled chin, the same way of biting his lower lip when scared. Marcus's own eyes, a steady gray that had once tracked enemy missiles through Afghan skies, now focused entirely on calming his son. His hands, which had once gripped the controls of an F-15 Eagle pulling 8 Gs, now gently rubbed Noah's back in patient circles. "Daddy, I don't like it," Noah whimpered, his voice muffled against Marcus's shoulder. "Too high, too scary." "I know, buddy, I know. But remember what we talked about? We're flying to see Grandma. She's making your favorite cookies." Elena Winters represented everything corporate success looked like. At 43, she'd built her aerospace consulting firm from nothing into a $2 billion powerhouse. Her suit cost more than most people's rent, tailored to perfection, every line deliberate. The Patek Philippe watch on her wrist caught the overhead lights as she swiped through emails, each motion crisp and efficient. Her dark hair, cut into a sharp bob that cost $600 to maintain, framed a face that rarely smiled in professional settings. Behind her designer glasses, her hazel eyes held the calculating coldness of someone who'd learned early that sentiment was weakness. She'd grown up in South Chicago projects, where dinner was often crackers and government cheese, where hoping for better was considered foolish. Every designer label she wore, every first-class ticket she booked, every dismissive glance at people she deemed beneath her, they were all armor against ever being that powerless girl again. Her phone, the latest prototype her company was testing, buzzed constantly. But her attention kept drifting to the crying child 4 rows ahead, her jaw tightening with each sob. The flight attendants moved through their pre-flight routine with practiced calm, but even they exchanged sympathetic looks as Marcus struggled with Noah. The other business class passengers showed varied reactions. An older gentleman shook his head in disapproval. A young couple looked uncomfortable. A woman traveling alone felt her heart clench with recognition. Marcus had saved for 8 months to afford these tickets. He knew the extra space and relative quiet would help Noah, who developed a fear of flying after his mother died. The accident had happened on a rainy Tuesday. A drunk driver, no warning, just gone. Noah had been 3, too young to fully understand why Mommy wasn't coming home, old enough to feel the absence like a physical wound. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Noah's distress escalated into full panic. The cabin pressure changes felt like monsters attacking his small ears. "The plane is too loud, Daddy," Noah cried, his voice reaching a pitch that made several passengers wince visibly. Marcus whispered in the low rumble that had once steadied pilots before combat missions, now serving to anchor one small boy. "Remember, buddy? The engines are like really big fans. They're what help us fly to Grandma." But Noah was beyond reason, his sobs filling the cabin. Elena's fingers stopped typing. She caught the eye of a passing flight attendant, a young man named David who looked barely old enough to serve drinks. "Excuse me." Elena's voice was surgical precision wrapped in politeness. "Is there nothing that can be done about this disruption? Some of us are working." David's smile was professional but strained. I understand, ma'am. The child is clearly having a difficult time. Perhaps noise-canceling headphones? Elena's laugh was sharp. I shouldn't need headphones in business class. She raised her voice slightly. Don't parents have medication for this? Or, I don't know, babysitters? The words hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus's shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he reached into his worn backpack and pulled out a small toy airplane, its paint chipped from years of play. Look, Noah, Captain Zoom wants to show you how planes work. See? He's not scared. Noah's sobs quieted slightly as he took the toy, his fingers tracing the wings. In that brief moment of relative peace, Marcus turned slightly, his eyes meeting Elena's for the first time. I apologize for the disturbance, he said, his voice carrying quiet authority earned, not demanded. He lost his mother 18 months ago. Flying reminds him of our last family trip together. The words were simple, factual, without self-pity, but they landed heavy. Several passengers who'd been annoyed suddenly found their phones fascinating. The older gentleman across the aisle looked away, uncomfortable. Elena, however, remained unmoved. In her experience, everyone had a sob story. She'd heard thousands, in interviews and meetings, from people wanting funding or sympathy or special treatment. Perhaps, she said, her tone clipped and professional, you should have considered alternative transportation. A woman in the row behind, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a bun, turned to Elena with the kind of look that could freeze water. Young lady, she said softly but firmly, you have no idea what that man has sacrificed, what he's been through. Perhaps compassion isn't too much to ask. Elena's fingers returned to her tablet with unnecessary force. I've found that compassion is often just another word for making excuses. We all have challenges. Some of us simply manage them better. The older woman shook her head sadly, but said nothing more. The plane reached cruising altitude, and for 20 blessed minutes, Noah fell into an exhausted sleep against Marcus's chest. Marcus didn't move, barely breathed, afraid the slightest motion would wake him. The cabin had settled into the white noise of flight when Noah woke suddenly, disoriented and immediately distressed. In his confusion, he knocked over the orange juice Marcus had hopefully placed on his tray table. The liquid arced through the air in slow motion before landing with devastating accuracy on Elena's cream-colored Louboutin heels. The silence that followed felt like physical pressure. Elena stared at her ruined shoes, $900, custom ordered, only worn twice. Her face became a mask of controlled fury. Are you kidding me? She hissed, standing abruptly. Do you have any concept what these cost? Marcus was already grabbing napkins, apologies tumbling from his lips as he tried to manage cleanup and his crying son simultaneously. I'm so sorry. Please let me. But Elena had already jammed the call button repeatedly, summoning David with an urgency usually reserved for medical emergencies. I need to be reseated immediately, she announced. This is completely unacceptable. That's when the plane lurched, not gentle turbulence, a violent drop that sent unsecured items flying. Overhead, bins popped open, bags tumbling into aisles. David was thrown against a seat back, crying out as his ribs connected with an armrest. The lights flickered, emergency floor strips illuminated. The plane lurched again, banking hard right. Elena, still standing, was thrown sideways into her seat. Her tablet skidded across the floor and shattered against a bulkhead. Her mask of composure cracked, revealing raw fear. Marcus had immediately secured Noah, his body curled protectively around his son, one hand braced against the seat ahead, instinct and training taking over. The captain's voice came over the intercom, professional but unable to hide the strain. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing severe technical difficulties with our flight systems. Please remain seated with seatbelts fastened. A pause that made everyone's breath catch. Then, with urgency that sent ice through every passenger's veins. This is Captain Martinez. We have a critical situation. My co-pilot is incapacitated and we're experiencing multiple system failures. If there is anyone on board with military fighter jet experience, please identify yourself to the crew immediately. The words "fighter jet experience" echoed in sudden, terrible silence. Elena's knuckles were white on her armrests, her breathing shallow and rapid. Marcus looked down at Noah, whose eyes were wide with fear, but who had stopped crying, sensing something serious was happening. He kissed his son's forehead gently. "Daddy needs to help the pilots, buddy. I'll be right back." "Stay with this nice lady," he said, carefully transferring Noah to the older woman across the aisle, who accepted the child with practiced grandmother instinct. Then Marcus stood, his voice cutting through rising panic with absolute calm. "Former Major Marcus Reed, United States Air Force. 12 years flying F-15 Eagles, 3 combat deployments. I can help." Every head in business class turned to stare at the man in the faded denim jacket. Elena's mouth fell open, her mind struggling to reconcile the struggling single father with a combat fighter pilot. David, despite obvious pain from his injured ribs, immediately gestured forward. "This way, sir, quickly." As Marcus made his way to the cockpit, memories flooded back with each step. The weight of his flight suit, the smell of jet fuel at dawn, the brotherhood of the squadron. He remembered his last flight, 3 days before Sarah went into labor with Noah. She'd made him promise to be there for the birth, and he'd kept that promise, never knowing it would be the last promise he'd make to her. The doctor said the embolism was rare, unpreventable, just one of those tragic things. He'd held Noah, still red and crying from birth, as Sarah slipped away. Her last words, "Take care of him, love him enough for both of us." He'd resigned his commission the following week, traded his fighter jet for a construction job, his officer's quarters for a small apartment, his entire purpose narrowed to one thing: be the father Noah needed. The Air Force had called him back twice, offering training positions, desk jobs, anything to keep his expertise. He'd declined both times. Noah needed stability, routine, a present father, not someone who disappeared for months. The cockpit door opened to controlled chaos. Captain Martinez, a veteran with 28 years of flying experience, was wrestling with controls that seemed to have developed their own agenda. The co-pilot slumped in his seat, conscious but clearly incapacitated, his face gray with what appeared to be severe food poisoning or worse. The instrument panel was a constellation of warning lights. "Thank God," Martinez breathed when he saw Marcus. "You current on commercial systems?" Marcus was already scanning instruments, his trained eye cataloging failures with frightening speed. "Boeing 737-800, he asked, his hands hovering over controls with muscle memory from countless simulator hours. "Similar enough to military transports I've flown. Looks like hydraulic pressure problems, possible flight control computer failures. May I?" Martinez immediately vacated the captain's seat. The transformation was immediate and striking. The uncertain father became the confident pilot, hands moving across controls with practiced efficiency. "All right, Captain. Walk me through your backup systems while I stabilize our attitude and altitude." Elena sat frozen in her seat, mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed. The man she'd dismissed as a failure, judged as beneath her, was now literally holding their lives in his hands. She could hear his voice over the intercom, calm and authoritative, explaining they'd be making an emergency descent and preparing for an unconventional approach to Chicago O'Hare. "Folks, this is Major Reed. We're dealing with some technical challenges, but Captain Martinez and I have things under control. You'll feel some unusual movements as we work through our procedures. Keep those seatbelts tight, and we'll have you safely on the ground in approximately 30 minutes. Noah, still held by the older woman, had stopped crying completely. "That's my daddy," he said with simple pride. "He flies planes." Elena gripped her armrest, not just from fear, but from something else. Shame, perhaps, or the uncomfortable realization that everything she believed about success and worth had just been challenged by a man in a thrift store jacket. In the cockpit, Marcus worked methodically through emergency procedures he hadn't thought about in years. His hands remembered what his conscious mind had tried to forget: the precise pressure needed on the yoke, the subtle adjustments to throttle, the way to read instruments that were screaming contradictory information. "We've got asymmetric flap deployment," he told Martinez calmly. Left side stuck at 15 degrees. Right side won't deploy past 5. That's giving us the roll tendency. Martinez nodded, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool cockpit air. Can we land like this? We can land, Marcus said with quiet confidence. It won't be pretty, but we can do it. I need you on radio with Tower. Tell them we need every emergency vehicle they have in the longest runway available. We're coming in hot, and we're coming in crooked. The descent was a masterclass in controlled desperation. Marcus fought the aircraft's tendency to roll left, constantly making minute corrections, his hands never still on the controls. Through the cockpit windows, Chicago grew larger, the city's grid spreading beneath them like a circuit board. Landing gear, Marcus called out. Martinez pulled the lever. A grinding sound, then 2 green lights and 1 red. Nose gear's not locked. Of course it isn't, Marcus muttered, but his voice remained steady. Okay, new plan. We'll touch down on the mains first, keep the nose up as long as possible. Let it settle gentle. Elena watched through her window as the ground rushed up to meet them. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights creating rivers of red and blue. Beside her, a businessman had his eyes squeezed shut, lips moving in silent prayer. The young couple held hands so tightly their knuckles had gone white. The landing was controlled violence. The main wheels hit hard, the plane bouncing once before settling. Marcus held the nose up, fighting the aircraft's desire to drop forward, bleeding off speed with every second. When the nose gear finally touched, it held. The plane shuddered, veered slightly left, then straightened as Marcus applied asymmetric braking. They rolled to a stop halfway down the runway. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause and tears of relief. Marcus's voice came over the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Chicago. On behalf of Captain Martinez and your crew, we apologize for the excitement. Emergency services will be boarding shortly. Thank you for your cooperation. He emerged from the cockpit 7 minutes later, after ensuring all shutdown procedures were complete. His jacket was soaked with sweat, his hands trembling slightly from adrenaline crash. But his first and only concern was Noah. His son flew into his arms, and Marcus held him like he was the most precious thing in the universe, which he was. Elena stood as he passed, words forming and dying on her lips. Marcus paused, meeting her eyes briefly. No anger there, no satisfaction at her obvious discomfort, just tired understanding. Your shoes, he said quietly. I'll pay for them. Might take a few months, but I'll make it right. The offer, so sincere despite everything, broke something inside Elena. No, she managed, voice barely above a whisper. No, please. I'm the one who should. But Marcus was already moving past, Noah clinging to his neck. 10 days passed before Elena found the courage to reach out. She'd had her assistant track down Marcus's information, not difficult given the media attention, though Marcus himself had declined all interview requests. She found him through a barely used social media profile. Just photos of Noah at the playground, at kindergarten, covered in paint at art class. No self-promotion, no humble bragging, just a father documenting his son's childhood. She messaged him, asking if they could meet for coffee. His response was polite but distant. Not necessary. Glad everyone was safe. But Elena persisted, something she was very good at, though this time for different reasons than usual. She needed to apologize properly. More than that, she needed to understand how she'd gotten everything so wrong. They met at a small cafe in Pilsen, far from the downtown towers where Elena usually held court. Marcus arrived in jeans and a flannel shirt, Noah in tow, because, as he explained, finding last-minute childcare was complicated. Elena had come straight from the office but had left her usual armor of designer accessories in the car. She bought Noah a hot chocolate and a cookie, then sat across from Marcus, struggling to find words that had never come easily. I was horrible to you, she finally said, meeting his steady gaze. Not just rude, cruel, and you still saved my life, saved all of us. Marcus shrugged, the gesture minimizing what he'd done. You were having a bad day. We all have them. But Elena shook her head firmly. No, don't let me off that easy. I judged you, dismissed you because of how you looked, because you didn't fit my narrow definition of success. She told him about her company, about the aviation safety systems they were developing, about how she'd actually rejected his resume 7 months earlier when he'd applied for a consultant position because his recent work history just said construction foreman, and she hadn't bothered looking deeper. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. I'm offering you a job, she said, not out of guilt, because you're exactly the expertise we need, someone who understands flight at an instinctive level. Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. I appreciate that. Really. But I can't. Noah's in a good school near our apartment. He has friends, routine. Stability is what he needs right now. Elena found herself watching Noah, who was carefully arranging cookie crumbs into a pattern on his napkin. What if you consulted part-time, she heard herself saying. Work from home when possible. Flexible hours around Noah's schedule. We could make it work. Their coffee grew cold as they talked. Elena learned about Sarah, a social worker who'd wanted to adopt more children someday. Marcus learned about Elena's mother who'd abandoned her at age 8, leaving her with a father who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on consistently. She told him about sleeping in libraries because they were warm and safe, about deciding at age 11 that she'd never be powerless again. He told her about his last mission, providing air support for a medical evacuation in Kandahar. How he'd come home to Sarah 8 months pregnant, knowing his fighting days were over. Do you miss it? Elena asked. The flying? Marcus considered this, absently reaching over to wipe chocolate from Noah's face. I miss the clarity of it. Up there, the mission was clear-cut. Down here, I'm never sure if I'm making the right choices. 3 months later, Marcus officially joined Elena's company as a part-time consultant. The arrangement was unconventional, but effective. He worked from home 3 days a week, reviewing flight protocols and safety algorithms while Noah was at school. Twice a week he came to the office, and on those days, Noah spent afternoons in the company's newly established on-site childcare, a benefit Elena had pushed through over board objections. In his first 6 weeks, Marcus identified 4 critical vulnerabilities in their autonomous flight system that had been missed by engineers with decades more experience. Elena found herself looking forward to the days Marcus was in the office, not for romantic reasons, she told herself firmly, but because he brought a different perspective, one that challenged her assumptions in ways that made her better. The shift from professional to personal was gradual. It started with Elena staying late on days Marcus was in, their discussions about flight systems morphing into broader conversations about life and purpose and what actually mattered. One evening after a particularly intense day of testing, Elena found Marcus in the break room staring at his phone with pure panic. Noah's school just called. He's running a fever and vomiting. I'm 45 minutes away in this traffic. Without thinking, Elena grabbed her keys. I'll drive. My car has emergency lanes access. They made it in 18 minutes. Noah was in the nurse's office, flushed and miserable but immediately brightening when he saw his father. Daddy, I threw up on Miss Peterson's desk, he announced with the mixture of pride and embarrassment unique to 5-year-olds. Elena found herself kneeling to Noah's level. Would you like to see the flight simulator at my office sometime when you're feeling better? Noah nodded solemnly, then threw up again, this time on Elena's $400 silk blouse. The strange thing was, Elena didn't care. Sitting in Marcus's modest apartment an hour later, wearing one of his old Air Force t-shirts while her blouse soaked in the sink, watching him coax medicine into Noah with infinite patience, she felt more at peace than she had in years. You're good at this, she told Marcus as he tucked Noah into bed. The parent thing, Marcus laughed softly. I'm improvising 90% of the time. Sarah would have known exactly what to do. Elena watched him smooth Noah's hair with such tenderness. Maybe showing up and trying is enough. 6 weeks later, Elena showed up at Marcus's apartment on a Saturday with a picnic basket. We're going to the park, she announced. I brought food that I actually cooked myself. Well, assembled, there was minimal actual cooking. Noah was ecstatic, dragging Elena to see The best slide ever, while Marcus carried the basket, watching the unlikely pair with bemusement. Elena pushed Noah on the swings, learning the rhythm. She helped build a sandcastle that looked more like a sand pile, but which Noah declared perfect. She got dirt on her jeans and didn't once check her phone. "You're different," Marcus told her as they sat on a bench, Noah playing nearby. "From that first day on the plane." Elena considered this. "I spent so long proving I was strong enough to not need anyone that I forgot humans are designed to need each other." "You reminded me of that." 4 weeks later, Elena invited them to a company gala. Marcus arrived in a borrowed tuxedo. Noah in a small suit he'd picked out himself, complete with a clip-on bow tie. The evening was a study in contrasts. Elena watched Marcus navigate conversations with billionaire investors, his quiet confidence commanding respect. She watched Noah charm board members' spouses, telling them about "my daddy who saved the plane." But the moment that completely undid Elena came when the band played something slow and Marcus asked Noah to dance. He held his son with such tenderness, careful and gentle, making Noah giggle as they spun in careful circles. "Your date seems wonderful," a board member commented to Elena. Elena didn't correct the assumption. "He's extraordinary," she said simply. The conversation that changed everything happened 5 weeks later. They sat in Elena's office after Marcus had given a presentation to the executive team about safety protocols. "You were brilliant," she told him. Marcus loosened his tie. "I kept thinking about Noah getting on a plane someday, wanting it to be as safe as possible." Elena moved to sit beside him on the couch. "Do you ever think about what Sarah would say? About us spending time together?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I used to have imaginary conversations with her every night. Lately I've been telling her about you." Elena's breath caught. "What do you tell her?" Marcus turned to face her fully. "That you make Noah laugh, that you're brilliant but also kind, that you're nothing like what I expected to need, but exactly what I didn't know I was looking for." He paused. "I'm also terrified. I don't know how to do this without feeling like I'm betraying her memory." Elena reached for his hand. "I'm terrified too. I don't know how to be what you need, what Noah needs, but I want to try, if you'll let me." Marcus squeezed her hand. "We take it slow. Noah comes first, always." Elena nodded. "Agreed. Absolutely." To their first official date was to a children's museum with Noah as enthusiastic chaperone. Their second was dinner at a restaurant with crayons on every table. Their third was a company event where Marcus was no longer just the consultant, but explicitly Elena's partner. 8 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Elena stood in Marcus's kitchen making pancakes, badly, but with genuine effort. Noah sat at the table providing running commentary. Marcus read the paper, the picture of domestic contentment. "Elena?" Noah's voice was serious in that way only small children manage. "Yes, buddy? Are you going to be my mommy?" The question hung in the air. Elena knelt beside Noah's chair, meeting his eyes. "I'd like to be part of your family, if you'll have me. But you already have a mommy. She loved you so much, and even though she's in heaven, she's still your mommy. I'd just be Elena, who loves you and your daddy and wants to be here for both of you. Is that okay?" Noah considered this with grave 5-year-old seriousness, then nodded. "Okay, but you have to learn to make better pancakes." The tension broke with laughter, Marcus pulling both into a hug that smelled like burnt batter and felt like home. 3 months later, Marcus proposed in the park where they'd had their first unofficial date. Noah held the ring box with barely contained excitement, bouncing on his toes. Elena said yes before Marcus could finish his prepared speech. The wedding was small, held in the backyard of the house they'd bought together. Elena wore a simple dress that Noah had helped choose. Marcus wore his Air Force dress uniform for the first time in 4 years. In her vows, Elena talked about learning that strength wasn't about not needing anyone, but about being brave enough to admit when you did. Marcus talked about second chances, about how love wasn't finite, but something that grew the more you shared it. Noah announced to everyone that, "Now I have the best daddy and the smartest Elena, and we're all going to live happily ever after, just like in the stories." 6 years later, Elena stood before a board meeting, CEO of a company now valued at $8 billion, but her proudest achievements weren't on profit statements. They were in industry-leading parental leave policies, the on-site child care that had become a model for other companies, safety protocols that had prevented 4 potential disasters, and the Sarah Reed Memorial Scholarship for single parents pursuing aviation careers. She thought about that flight 6 years ago, about the woman she'd been, successful but hollow. As she walked toward Marcus and Noah waiting for their Friday lunch tradition, she thought about the captain's panicked words. "We need a fighter pilot on board." What they'd really needed, what she'd needed, was someone to show her that courage wasn't about flying alone above the clouds, but about choosing to land, to trust, to build something worth protecting on solid ground. As Noah ran into her arms, chattering about his science project, as Marcus's hand found hers with easy familiarity, Elena knew she hadn't just been saved that day. She'd been given a second chance at the life she never knew she wanted, the family she never thought she deserved. Sometimes the people we judge most harshly turn out to be the heroes we need most desperately. Marcus didn't need recognition or validation. He just needed to be the father Noah deserved. And Elena learned that true strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about being brave enough to admit when you do. This story reminds us that success isn't measured by designer labels or corner offices. It's measured by the lives we touch, the love we give, and the courage to show up when it matters most. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these meaningful stories with more people who need to hear them. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional journey. Drop a comment below telling us what moment touched your heart the most. Was it Marcus saving the plane, Elena's transformation, or Noah's innocent wisdom? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that second chances exist, that redemption is possible, and that the most extraordinary people often wear the most ordinary clothes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing in stories that celebrate the hidden heroes among us. Until next time, remember, the person you dismiss today might be the one who saves you tomorrow.